All right. Well, such is my life. My laptop here, my only means of computer work right now, is breaking. So we'll see what we can do with what we got. Second one to break within 12 months? Really? Seriously? Alrighty. So, as I was going over my idea for um, this book, uh, I was really going over what I was thinking about the other night when I was talking about Pokemon and how, in the first Pokemon game, they didn't have all the Pokemon that they have now. Why I'm using this as an example, I don't know. It's silly for me to be thinking this way. It's also important for me to realize that my original idea for this book was to cover logical fallacies and biases and other types of wrongs that we have within our awareness of our culture. Um, and when approaching that, my idea was to cover examples of how commonly we misunderstand or do things wrong. Now, in the follow up to doing the research for that, I came across the fact that there are many more logical fallacies, biases, and uh, moral wrongs than we usually are aware of. And so I have to ask myself, I'm a person who likes to be complete. I don't like to say like, well, they're 453, but I'm only going to cover the first 200. And there's a part of me that says, no, like you can't do it halfway. But there's no reason why I can't do this in more than one installment. Like I can do a sequel book to this book that I'm doing that covers the slightly more esoteric wrongs, the ones that, like, if you're not in a lab running an experiment, you're less likely to encounter. So I do think going back to my original idea of hitting the ones that you're more likely to encounter on a regular basis makes it possible for me to focus on the big key areas for the casual reader and then do a sequel more in depth. And part of that is, realizing that, like, the English language has what, 150,000 words in it. Most people don't use more than 20 to 50,000 words, and everyday communication oftentimes uses less than 5,000 words. You can make yourself clear with about 2 to 3,000 words. So, and you can do that for a lot of different languages. If you just learn the 1,000 to 3,000 most commonly used words and the way they're used grammatically within a sentence, you will be able to reasonably hold conversations in another language on a regular level. Now, that's not to say you'll be able to get a job and fluently communicate in that language with every person who comes in to that job. There's specialized language that you use in a particular environment that isn't part of the 1,000 to 3,000 most commonly used words. So, looking at it from that perspective, the language of wrongs, um, it's very likely that there is a minimum threshold for maximum value. I guess some people use the 80-20 rule. What's the 20% that gets you 80% of the value? Um, it gets you 80% of the way to fluency. So if I could do a set of most return on investment for a set of biases and a set of logical fallacies and a set of moral wrongs. Um, that that book should be the first one, the one that will return the most value to the average person reading this book. It's not going to cover the rare, unusual circumstance of some strange study where it's important to know that one. And that's where like a volume two comes into play, where you can have, okay, like volume one covers most of the common bases. Volume two, to be released at a later date, will cover some of the more specialized application of the philosophy of taboos, wrongs, and whatnot. And then, is there enough material to maybe take it out to a third book? It's possible. Um, I would say if the first book, that's the trick to doing this, I think for me, is if the first book is kept to one wrong per page and uh, I sort of target myself at around 200 to 200 and maybe 80 max, 280 pages. Um, that gives me roughly like the moral wrongs is probably going to be short enough that I can count on it being less than 20 entries. So per page, that's 20 pages. The intro sections that I talked about doing, what is a wrong and how to identify when you're uh, using a wrong, how not to be afraid to be wrong, those types of things. I can see that being 10 or under pages. So 30 pages for the first two sections. Um, and then I figure roughly 200 to 230 pages of biases and logical fallacies should give me plenty of room to get a good enough resolution into the topic that it's going to cover most use cases. The question is like if I do that and the next book has, you know 410 potential entries, can I make a volume two that's bigger than volume one? If it's 410, maybe I could split it up into two volumes. That's 200. It's debating on like how I would split it up into later volumes. I kind of would prefer it to be a two-volume set, no more than three. But yeah, I could probably do a three-volume set. I have to think about it. Um, yeah. All right, I'll think about that portion. But in the meantime, the reason I bring this up is for the current volume, volume one, um, being able to get the meatier choices, the ones that are more important, that are more universally applicable and uh, are less likely to come into situations where nobody knows. Like 1 out of 100 people know this one, and it's a value to them. I those those are less important to include in this first one. The first one really should be that you know 1 in 10 people will encounter this in their daily lives at some point, and there's value in understanding and knowing about it. And I hadn't really anticipated this being the case. This you think about writing a nonfiction book, and the first thing comes to mind is, well, these are all just facts. It's correlation. It's uh, uh, collating facts. It's aggregating facts. Well, the thing is, you can keep building and building and building a supply of facts. There has to be a point of cutting it off. When is it good enough? You can add more data to even the remotest topic of, yeah, you could do something like origami. Like, how many different ways are there to fold a crane? And how, the techniques, you could go endlessly, pointlessly going deep into the geometry and the fiber creasing on paper. It's not important. What's important is getting it to the point where it's usable to achieve a set result. And so, starting with the goal of the book being that goal of being able to say it, like, how can I make a better argument for whatever I'm arguing? How can I check my stance or beliefs or understandings for flaws that I need to address? How do I do those things? And that's the desired application for it. Once you have the application for it, now you have to look at who's your audience. And in this case, the audience isn't the geneticist who's in a lab making an assumption about the behavior of microorganisms in a petri dish. So biases or fallacies, anthropomorphizing these single-celled organisms is a sure way to come across a problem. Expecting that, oh, this single-celled organism is, performing a mating ritual. It's doesn't have a neurological uh, basis for forming cultural or courtship rituals. So it doesn't make sense to be, focusing on something that has such a minute area of applicability. So the target audience for this book is going to be, and it's my temptation is to say everybody. You should never write a book that's supposed to be for everybody because it's going to be not good enough for anybody at that point. It's like the saying that some people I know have taught me when I was younger was like, the cool thing about a Swiss Army knife is, if you need a can opener and a saw and a knife blade and a corkscrew, it has all of those. The bad thing about a Swiss Army knife is the corkscrew sucks. The knife is not great. The saw will take you forever to get through a branch in an emergency situation. And the can opener is not the best can opener in the world. So it has all the capabilities to do a thing in a pinch, but it is not the ideal tool for doing those things. And I would much rather build a tool that's better for making a good argument and recognizing when you're wrong and how to handle that. That's more valuable to me than being a tool that everybody's going to use all the time. I want it to be, I mean, that's not true. I want everybody to be able to check their arguments, but I can't make it fit the whimsy and desires of every individual. Like, every possible use case for every individual who reads this book, I can't do that. Not in a single volume. Well, I could do it in a single volume. It would be a 500 to 600 page volume. Be a bit of a mess. And like, the thing is, I think about like when you do YouTube videos, like when I do my videos here, I'm always trying to be acutely aware of the fact that, like, if I run over 20 minutes long in this video, people are going to walk away within the first 10 minutes. A lot of people just don't have the patience to sit through something that should be done more concisely. And I feel like if you were to write a 5 to 600 page book, the number of people who are going to pick up that book and use it decreases exponentially. If you do a 200-page book about the size of a regular novel, maybe even a little smaller than some of the novels that are written these days, 200, 250-page book, that's something people are comfortable with. They can hold that up in their hands, look at it and go, "Okay, that's not intimidating. This is something I could potentially use." And so if you do that, you wanna do the ones that they're gonna get the most value from in the first one. Um, so if this were a different book, if this were about a different topic, maybe, um, origami again, people wanna fold a crane. If you can teach them how to fold a heart, um, they'll find a use for folding a heart and giving it to somebody. If you teach them to fold a piece of action origami, that when you pull on a piece of it, it does something. That's something they can show off, share, and interact with other people with. Showing them how to do a piece of modular origami where you can make a triangle that slots into another triangle in just the right way that you can build uh, structures out of. That's pretty cool too. There is not a lot of interest in a 700-page book talking about how to compose seven-sided polygons using modular tiles folded in origami. The audience for that is going to be next to nothing. And if you have the other, desired and positive models in your book interspersed in a 700-page volume of modular polygons, nobody's going to buy that book. If you do a book on how to fold a unicorn, a heart, a piece of action origami, and some basic modular tiles, you can sell that book and then make a sequel going further into each one of those categories. Because the vast majority of people who buy that book are going to buy it for how useful the first book is. And the vast number of people who buy the sequel will be the ones who came back because they wanted to learn more, because there's a few more things they want to do that they can't do with the first one yet. It won't be as many as bought the first book, and that's because for the vast majority of people, the first book met all of their needs. And that's what I need to do, is make the first one meet the needs, and the need in this case is delineating the most commonly encountered and most easily recognized, resolved, and most applicable wrongs in our world, and how to address them, actionably handle or manage those wrongs. And if I can do that, I should set that sort of cutoff point for the most actionably, the most actionable, the ones that get you the majority of what you need done in volume one. So I feel like I'm starting to ramble or repeat myself a little bit. And so part of what I'm going for now is I'm just compiling a list of, and it's like it's a judgment call, and I'm always a little nervous about this because And maybe I should do this as a header for the bias section. What I see as most likely to be encountered in my day-to-day life may be the valid set of arguments for wrongs that I encounter in my life, but I'm me. I'm biased in what I see as the most commonly or most applicable um, uh, facts in this book. And I'm cognizant of the fact that um, that bias means that I may be falsely including a thing that's more esoteric for a majority of people and missing things that are valuable to the majority of the people. And that's inherently one of the interesting things. Like, it's interesting, it's very meta about this book that including a section on fallacies uh, or biases, um, and trying to keep it to a controlled volume of biases based off of the most applicable exposes me to choices that are reliant on my own biases. And because this is a book about finding, understanding, and recognizing your own biases and how to manage or circumvent them, it's interesting to note that the book itself is an exercise in addressing those biases. So it's it's a tricky approach to doing this. I don't know, but here's the thing. As I looked into this, I don't think I've encountered to date a book that tackles the issue of moral wrongs, and biases and fallacies. And I'm not saying there aren't any books. I'm not saying nobody's ever discussed this, nobody's approached this topic. I'm saying that if they have been done, they've been done as philosophical treatises and scholarly works on metacognition and awareness, and they're they're not written for the average person. They're written for students, teachers, or scholars, um, or researchers, or you could go into the field of psychology, and there will be lessons learned about how to recognize biases and how to circumvent them in the course of treating somebody so that you don't do more harm than good because you are not understanding the circumstances outside of your own bias or logical fallacies or moral standpoint. Um, so those types of things do exist. Um, I'm sure of it, but I have to date not been able to find a book for people who want to make a better argument, who are your average person, just looking to be better at understanding and communicating and forming sound ideas. And so, like, if nobody else has done this, nobody else has done it better than anything I do. But by the same token, nobody else has done it worse than I'll end up doing. So I'm sort of, on one hand, I'm setting the bar, but it's also possible that I'm setting a very, very low bar. And I don't want it to be known as the book that should have been better. I want it to have a value. I suppose I'm second guessing my goals here. I'm second guessing whether or not I'm qualified to do this. But like I said, like nobody else has done it yet. And part of that for me is this whole project and the subsequent projects that'll come after this is not to be the best at a thing and not doing this like I've frequently had conversations with other people who say, someday I'll write a book. I've known people who've been saying that for 15 years and haven't written word one. Now, I've written some things. They're not the best things in the world, but they exist. And you can take a look at some, I won't reveal some of them here, but if you were to take a look at some of the things I wrote and you don't agree with them or they don't satisfy what you wanted from them, you have the ability at that point to look at it and go, what I really wanted from this was this. And then you can write those. It's it's an opportunity for you to make something in the world that didn't exist before because you want it to exist. Because that's the reason I do a lot of the things that I do. I don't do them for fame. I'm not doing this YouTube channel clearly. I'm not doing it to drive a huge subscriber number. For me, at the end of this, more than subscribers, more than views, the thing that would make me happiest is number of people who view my channel who themselves have then gone out and written a book, made a board game, came up with new recipes based off of my prompts or my inspirations that I offer, or um, my just saying, make something with this. I want to see what you make. I want to I want to build a community where at the end of a project like this, five other people tell me about the books they wrote and where they've got them up for sale. That's more important to me than the number of views or subscribers I get for something like this. And having said that, I have to do, in order to get that, I have to produce the videos that I produce. I have to create the prompts. I have to write a bad story that you think you can write better. I have to make the blocks that other people can use to build their own things with. I have to encourage other people. And so I kind of want this book to be some aspect of that. If I want people to, if I think about if I want to go into a debate or have a deep conversation about the topic of something that's interesting to me, and I want to make sure that my arguments are sound, and I want to make sure that the other person, if they're interested in it, also has sound arguments, so that we can understand each other better and not do a disservice to the things we are arguing for. If somebody wants to discuss topics like gay marriage, gun control, uh, re- reproductive rights, um, all of those topics that are hot button topics, you do no service to your argument by arguing by fallacies or using biases or using a personal moral as a objective moral. And making it clear what those qualities are that make a sound argument and avoid those pitfalls means that we can come together and have an actual conversation, have an actual debate that I could see the value in your statements, even if they're opposite of what my values are. And I'm not distracted by you using faulty arguments or your own personal biases or religious moral structure in place of objective moral values. And that to me is a value I want this book to enable. And if I do this book and I do it wrong, if I don't do it well enough, it's unfortunate, but to a certain degree, at this point, I'm doing it more right than anybody else has done because I can't find one by anybody else. So I can be wrong because it's the start of a conversation. It's not the last word. It's the first word. It's the icebreaker. Let's examine how we are wrong and try to find ways to eliminate them or minimize those aspects of ourselves and be better at communication. Now, will it get it all right in the first one? No, of course not. Of course not. There's never a chance that that would ever happen. Even if I do this in such a way that within a year, 10 other people do this same book but do it better, I would be happy with that because it got it started. But not only that, those 10 other people, they're not going to get it perfect either. But if they do it better, the conversations get better too. And that's what's important for what I want to do with this book. And I think the best way to do that is um, the first book, especially being the one that communicates the most commonly useful and applicable wrongs and methods of handling them. And so I'm thinking at this point that the first intro chapters are going to have to be less than 40 pages or less. The moral wrongs chapter should also be 40 pages or less. I'm going to say I don't see myself pushing that one much past 25 to 30, and more than likely being in the 15 to 20 range pages. It's the bias and the logical fallacy sections that I can kind of see roughing out, and I have to go through the lists that I've built up here and really pick out, I want to say, the top 100 per category. And sort each one into a subgroup of, this is an attack on character, and this is a um, like sort of. I keep wanting to go back to the Pokemon example because they're sort of like the iconic example of a monster in the midst of a situation who you have to attack and defend against. And there are hundreds of them. And using the right defense or attack becomes more effective based on type. And so in this case, building a sort of a Pokédex of these uh, argument monsters. But anyway, like building a sort of like a chart of types of arguments or wrongs in an argument, and what their weaknesses are and what their strengths are. I want to be careful about the strengths. It's occurring to me right now that, like, if I tell you that using a straw man argument is super effective against somebody else's argument or flawed argument, I don't want to encourage flimflammery. I don't want to encourage shoddy arguments as a mechanism for winning a fight using fallacies and bias. That's an uncomfortable implication. I hadn't thought about that before I got started on this. That's a weird one. What kind of responsibility as the writer do I have for this misapplication of what I'm creating? I don't know. I can't I can't not write it because somebody will potentially misuse this. That's I mean, you can't not create a medicine that could cure an illness because somebody might use it recreationally. You can't you can't not make a drug that is a pain med that could benefit a lot of people in chronic pain just because some people might use it to get high. You're never going to be able to stem that flow. Somebody's always going to misuse what you create. It's well, not it if your creation is a painting, it's really hard for somebody to misuse that unless you're talking about theft and passing it off as their own work, plagiarism as in poetry or writing. That's that's unfortunate and it's wrong, but it's not necessarily a danger. I don't know. This is opening up a whole different meta argument here. But yeah, so I'm I'm weeding down my lists now to a more manageable portion. I'm still thinking this is day 3. Golly, could I really in the next 24 hours get all of my chosen ones lined up, marginally fleshed out, and get it to a point where it's mostly just up for editing, beta reading, and formatting for um, sale at Kindle. Or I'm looking at Smashwords too. I'm not sure which way I'll go with that. I may end up doing this first week being just the writing of it, and then by the end of the month, it should have gone through editing and beta reading. Because a lot of that stuff, there's not going to be a lot for me. Like, I'll do the first grammar and spell check and read through for an edit. I'm going to miss some of it because as the writer, it'll make perfect sense to me. But getting beta readers and maybe hiring a dedicated editor for it. Getting those, I won't have a lot of things to say or offer about it, other than like a minute or two update later on. Um, and that'll take time. It won't happen necessarily. Something new will happen every day. So I'm thinking I will get it to first draft edited version of it by the end of the week. And then in the subsequent weeks, uh, any updates in the progress of that process. And then by the end of the month, hoping that goes on sale through Amazon. That seems reasonable to me. The writing of it being done in a week, um, from idea to sale in a month. Yeah, I think that's the way I'm going to approach this. That makes the most sense. And since at the end of this week, my hope is to do a movie night, which would be kind of fun, but also to do um, a follow-up project and a different sort, a movie program video um, version of this, because my channel does the book, movie, game, taste test, product, service, music or art, video game, and those are my categories of things that I try, review, and uh, prompt people to create new content based off of. And um, part of that is showing how to do that. So I'm going to do that for this book. This is how I take from an idea to a written work to a published work that can be bought. Doing something similar for video, um, and then something similar for a game, and then something similar for some methodology of taste testing or um, food, and then product or service. I might have those two switched. But anyway, so this month I will do this week. I will do the writing, the editing, and formatting will be done in subsequent weeks to be for sale at the end of the month. And starting next week, I'm hoping to do the video. And again, I may hit something similar on the spectrum of the creation of a thing can happen in a week. The finalizing of a thing and putting it out to market in some format will take subsequent weeks of little to report, but with a release date potentially at the same time as the book, and then board game, and then product or service. So that's what I'm thinking right now. Any thoughts or ideas? I'd be happy to hear them. This is going into the archives with the previous episodes. And I guess I'll see you tomorrow. Hopefully, I have a lot of work done by then. Take care.